and welcome to Browsing the Bible. Brother Burgess here. And before we get started, I would just invite you to go ahead and click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you'll be aware each time that we have a video released. We try to do it 3 times a week. Today we're looking at Genesis chapter 27. This is the story in which Isaac will bestow the blessing upon his son. He intends to do it on Esau. Things get changed and it winds up going to Jacob. So how does this take place? Well, first of all, Isaac, he knows that the day of his death is near, so he tells his son Esau, go out to the field, hunt me some game, and then I will in turn bless you. So he goes off and does that. The Bible points out that he could not see. That's very important. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes here. Rebekah overhears Isaac's plans, and she favors Jacob. See, Abraham's favorite son, Isaac's favorite son was Esau. Not good to have favorites, but he did. Rebekah's favorite son was Jacob. Now, she did know that Jacob was to get the covenant blessing. And so rather than relying on God to see to it that that blessing comes about, which he certainly would have, it wouldn't have mattered whether Isaac tried to give it to Esau or not. God would make sure it gets to Jacob. Nevertheless, she overhears this and thinks, better take matters into my own hand. So she cooks up a plan to make sure that the blessing goes to Jacob by means of deceit. This is not good. So she discusses things with Jacob. She tells him to act quickly, and she says in verse 8, now my son, obey my voice. Fascinating that she says that. Recall how it was that Eve had told Adam, take of the fruit and eat. Exactly contrary to what God had said. And again, Abraham had listened, Abram at that point had listened to the voice of Sarai, his wife, when she said, go ahead and try to, let's have you go to my maidservant Hagar, and you'll have children by her. That's contrary to what God had promised. God said, I tell you, I will see to it that you have a child in your advanced age. And all the credit would go to Yahweh, because there's no way that Abraham could have done it himself. Certainly not with his wife Sarai being barren. Well, just as those two gentlemen, Adam and Abraham, listened to the voice of their wives, now we have a twist in this story. With the story of Isaac here, Isaac and Rebekah, we have Rebekah is getting her son to listen to her voice. So now we have a son listening not to the voice of his wife, but to the voice of his mother. And again, it's contrary to God. So that's fascinating right there. Now, in verse 10, she says that the way we're going to do this is, I'm going to go ahead, you're going to go out just into your father's flock. Kill a kid goat, bring it back to me quickly. I will prepare it, get it dressed. Your father will eat it, that he may eat and that he may bless thee before his death. So again, they're trying to implement God's covenant on their own human terms. Recipe for disaster. Jacob, objects. He says, well, I'm different. My brother's very, very hairy. This was noted at his birth. I'm a smooth man. It's going to be found out. This doesn't look like this will go well. She says, I'll take care of that. And she says, upon me be thy curse. Prophetic words. Indeed, she will rue the day that she uttered those, because once this story is over, she will never see her son again. So she sort of brought a curse on her own self, you might say. Now, in verses 18 through 29, this is where we have now Isaac and Jacob goes into Isaac, and he procures the blessing by fraud. But it's absolutely fascinating here. The Bible says that we are to walk by faith, not by sight. And if we could take just a little bit of license with that, we might say we are to walk by faith, not by any of our senses. In this section right here, we will see that Isaac is deceived by all 5 of his senses. Take note here. We know from verse 1 that it says Isaac's eyes were dim with age. He couldn't see. So that one sense is out. Now, in verses 21 and 22, Isaac invites Jacob to come over. He senses something doesn't seem right. But what he does is he says, that I may feel you. He won't come near, that I may feel you. Because he knows that Esau's a hairy man. So he says, okay, if it's indeed Esau, he should be hairy. And he has his questions because the voice seems to be that of Jacob. So he feels his hands. He says, well, he's hairy. So his senses are deceiving him. You might think, how can anybody mistake, goat hair for their own son's hair? Well, I guess it shows how pitiful our senses are. We can be easily deceived, and the devil knows it. So he cannot see. He's deceived by the sense of touch. And then he says, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So he's hearing the right words. And if he had hearkened to that, he might have done all right. Because the Bible does, after all, say, many times God calls out to his people and he says, "Hear, O Israel, hear what the Lord your God says." If he'd gone on that, he wouldn't have been deceived. He would have said, "I know you're Jacob. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Or at least it's not what I've asked for." But he doesn't go on that. He uses he goes on his lack of sight and on his he's so easily deceived by the sense of touch. And it goes on, it says here that he discerned him not. That's right. He's being fooled by relying on his senses. And then he asks the question, "Are you my very son Esau?" in verse 24. Jacob flat out lies. He says, "I am." At this point, Isaac eats and drinks what Jacob has brought him. So now the sense of taste is involved. He likes what he has. And since this is what he asked for, this makes a favorable impression, so he's more inclined to go with what he would like to believe, that this is his son Esau, even though he still has misgivings. And then, fascinatingly enough, in verse 27, he has his son come over again, and it says he smelled the odor of his raiment. So now the sense of smell, the fifth sense, is involved. And again, oh, well, it smells like Esau's clothes. It smells like one who works out in the field, who hunts in the field. So he says, well, it smells like him. It's the kind of food, it tastes like the food that he would prepare. And he feels like him. I can't see. And the only thing that suggests otherwise is my voice. But, well, he says he's my son. He's deceived on all 5 counts. His senses deceive him. If he had prayed and asked God, it would have been better off. And so at this point, having been deceived by all 5 senses, he blesses the deceiver Jacob. And interestingly enough, this does bring about God's purpose. God was going to bless Jacob anyways, but this is not the manner that God approved of. He had no means of making this covenant come about by deceit on the part of people. He intended it to come about purely through his own means. So, big lesson there for us. Now, in verses 30 through 38, Esau, when he comes in and he finds out that, wait a minute, somebody was here and took the blessing? What? He cries out for a blessing. He's distraught. And it doesn't come across in English, but I'll just tell you, in Hebrew, there's several plays on words here that highlight just how deceptive things really were. To Isaac, he was deceived by his senses. Esau seemed in so many ways to be Jacob. To him, there was a similarity, even though anybody who could have seen would have said there's clearly a difference here. But to him, it was close enough that he was deceived. Well, there are many words here that are close in sound but very different in meaning. For instance, the word Isaac in Hebrew is yitzach. It means laughter. It sounds almost identical to the word for crying out, which is tza'ak. And when Esau cries out, tza'ak, it almost sounds like Yitzhak, his father. Also, it says that he cried out with a bitter cry. That's marah. And he knows that his brother Jacob has come in by mirma, which is deceit. Mirma, marah, very similar in sound. Also, of course, Jacob, his name is Yaakov. And when Esau says, is he not rightly named Jacob or Yaakov? Because he has supplanted me. The word there, supplant, is akav. Akav is the verb on which Yaakov is built. So those two obviously sound the same. And then finally, when he's crying out for, he's recounting how he's been tricked twice now. He says that Jacob, first of all, he tricked me out of my bechorah, the right I have as the firstborn. He took advantage of the fact that I was hungry, so he took my bechorah. And now he's upset because Jacob has come along and beaten him to the punch, as it were, and stolen his bracha, his blessing. Bracha and bechorah sound very similar. In fact, it's just a switch of 2 consonants there. It sounds almost identical when you say it quickly. So the point is that all of these words, these pairs of words, they sound so similar, but they're quite different in meaning. And it seems to highlight how similar Jacob and Esau were to a man relying on his senses instead of faith. And I think that's the idea of the whole account right there. Now, when you look at Jacob's blessing and you look at Esau's blessing, it's fascinating. If you study here in verses 28 and 29, you'll see how Isaac blessed Jacob. And then when Esau just begs his father, bless me, don't you have a blessing for me? Bless me, me too, my father. You compare that blessing in 39 and 40, you'll see some similarities and you'll see some differences. Jacob's blessing, it says, may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, much grain and fresh wine. When you look at Esau's blessing, it says, your dwelling will be of the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. So it sounds almost identical so far, except it's in the reverse order. But then in Jacob's blessing, which Isaac thought he was giving to Esau, but which really was for Jacob, he says, let people serve you, nations bow down to you, be Lord over your brethren, which would certainly mean Esau there, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. By contrast, when Esau cries out for a blessing, here's what Isaac tells him. He says, by your sword you shall live, you shall serve your brother. Jacob is explicitly told, you will be the Lord of your brother, and your brother, let people serve you. Let your mother's sons, in other words, your brothers, bow down to you. But Esau's the exact reverse. You shall serve your brother. You know that only made Esau even angrier when he realized, what, this is my blessing to serve my brother? Ooh, it did not make him happy. And so the chapter closes in verses 41 through 46, and we get a peek into Esau's mind. He knew that, at least he thought, his father's death was near. It turns out it's not as near as he thought. But he thought it was pretty near, and so he plots to kill Jacob. He says, when my father's died, I will kill him. In verse 43, we find out here that Rebekah, she knows now that Esau is furious. And she realizes, okay, I've just alienated Esau. He hates me. And if he's plotting to kill you, Jacob, I could risk losing both my sons, one to death and one due to hatred. And so she looks out for the one she favors and tells him, you need to go. In verse 43, therefore, my son, obey my voice. He already obeyed her voice, and that was bad enough. Now she's telling him, obey my voice. Here's another plan she has. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother. And so she figures in verses 44 and 45, well, just, a few days, your brother's wrath will subside, and then I will send for you. Well, turns out Jacob's gone for 20 years. He never sees his mother again. She never sees him again. A very hard price to pay for the deception that was employed here. And now, in verse 46, Rebekah sins yet again. Oh, my. In verse 46, she makes a plausible excuse for why she wants Jacob to run away. She wants him to run away so that she doesn't lose him to death, having Esau kill her. But what she tells Isaac is, I'm just so distraught about all these, these wives of the land. We've seen how Esau married them, and it would just break my heart if Jacob did that. Let's send him away to Laban, my brother, and he can go get a decent wife there. Well, he will wind up getting a wife there. That's not the reason, though. So she's adding one sin after another here. So it's a tragic story, but a fascinating story. They're full of parallels and irony. But most of all, remember, we are to walk by faith, not by sight, or more broadly, by our senses. The devil can easily overmaster us on our senses. We saw how easily Isaac could be tricked, even deceived by something so, how foolish. He could mistake a goat's hair for his son's hair on his hand. Doesn't seem likely, but it can. And so how much more could we be deceived too? So bear that in mind. Please tune in the next time as we take a look here at Genesis chapter 28. Beautiful chapter. And we'll see about the story of Jacob as he goes on and he journeys and he has time away from father and mother. Until then, I invite you to continue to browse your Bible. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe below and hit that notification bell so you can be alerted each time we release a new video. Bye-bye.